Thank you to allow me again to speak at one of your meetings. Now, I knew a lot of what I'm going to read today, I didn't know until about 2016. Now, the Peace Pledge Union did some research work on conscientious objectors, and they produced an article saying the men who said no. And in that, in 2016, March 2016, I received this, and I found so much more information that I knew about my father. I knew he'd been a CEO, and I knew quite a bit of detail, but there was very much I didn't know. So I felt that probably the best was to read this particular article from the Peace Pledge Union, which was written then, which, with a few additions of personal items, and it's headed William Henry Saunders, 1888. Now, my father had worked for peace before war started, it not being prepared to kill another human being and believing that war was the wrong way to handle international conflict. He was 28 and working as a clerk when called before Radcliffe Tribunal in early 1916. Radcliffe is a cotton town near Manchester, where I was also born and brought up. And his argument for absolute exemption to the CO was unsuccessful. He was arrested as an absentee in May. After his arrest, William was sent before a magistrate's court in Bury and was fined 40 shillings, the standard fine levied on many COs. It doesn't sound a big figure, but it was probably 2 weeks average wage for a working class person. Charged as an absentee, he was sent to Kimnall Camp in North Wales as a nominal member of the army. At Kimnall, he continued, this is information I knew nothing about until, as I say, 2016. At Kimnall, he continued to resist any attempts to force him into military service, including refusing to wear a uniform. In action of defiance to the military authorities shared by many other COs, refusing to wear the assigned uniform indicated to both the rank and file and officers at Kimnall that William was not just a CO, but also one determined to give no concession whatever to militarism and war. Aided by a Quaker CO, James Carter, who provided support and assistance to many COs at Kimnall, William was able to make a strong and principled stand. This began a series of 6-month to 2-year prison sentences around the country after courts-martial at Kimnall Park in North Wales sentenced William to 2 years hard labour. The sentence was in Walton Prison in Liverpool, the hard labour amounting to sewing mailbags, picking ropes and other punitive tasks. Conditions in prison were bad, sleeping on hard boards for the first month, in solitary confinement with a no talking rule imposed. He was, as a CO, routinely faced with ridicule and ill treatment. When he first arrived there, he was told that he was on the next list of COs to be sent to France to face the death penalty. After 2 months in prison, William stood before the Central Tribunal in Wormwood Scrubs in order to gauge suitability for the Home Office scheme. He was judged to be a genuine CO and offered a choice: agree to strict rules of the Home Office scheme and be moved from prison to a work camp, or remain in prison. The HOS was intended to provide COs with work of national importance under the direct controls of civil authorities. Despite agreeing to move to the work camp, William remained officially in the army, albeit in Reserve Class W, and was eligible for call-up until the end of the war. The HOS camp was in Wakefield, Yorkshire. poor conditions there were made worse by riots and attacks on COs stirred by local and national newspapers, which encouraged people to think of COs as comfortable and pampered, quite unfairly. The hostility led eventually to Wakefield Camp being shut down. It was so bad. So because his work he thought was for military use, in fact, he knew it was for military use, he became unsatisfied with the HOS and transferred back to the poor conditions in prison, refusing to lend his labor in supporting the war effort in any way. This showed the strength of William's convictions and the courage needed to support them, as he chose to return to the harsh confines of prison rather than betray his pacifist ideals. It wasn't until some months after the war finished that he was released from prison to return to civilian life with job prospects difficult due to his stand. Some civilian rights, including the right to vote, were withheld from COs for several years after the war ended. My mother, his fiancée, supported him during the whole of this period and suffered much indignity from local people for courting a CO. They married a few months after his release, and their peace work continued the rest of their life. Now, I'd just like to say something about my mother's life at that time, because people don't always understand what effect being a CO has on other members of the family. Now, as I said, my mother supported him in prison throughout the whole period, visiting whenever it was allowed, which was rarely. To supplement his poor income before the war, he had taken on an insurance book, which involved daily collection of the pennies poor people were paying for health insurance, because of course there was no NHS or social service at the time of any degree. So that he would not lose this work whilst in prison, my mother, his fiancée, took over the collections, going from house to house. Because they knew her boyfriend was a CO, she suffered much indignity from them, insulted, given white feathers, and even spat on frequently. But she continued until her William was released. She married him as soon as possible after the war and initially faced a poverty-stricken life because he was refused employment because of his stand. Fortunately, he was a talented pianist and obtained odd jobs such as a pianist in cinemas showing silent films at that time, entertaining and tuning pianos. And pianos were very popular after the war. After several years, they owned a musical instrument shop, improved their prosperity, and had 2 children. They continued peace work and brought up 2 boys who became COs in World War II, influenced by their parents' strong Quaker principles. They never altered their strong views to the end of their lives, always speaking the words of peace.